The CARES Act, that funds that came from Washington after the pandemic started, there are certain criteria that are placed under that. Those funds have to be under current law, have to be expended by December 30th. And so through Accelerate South Carolina, through Reopen South Carolina, through the work of the General Assembly, we understood that broadband rose to the top of opportunities for us to try to address. We are under a very limited time schedule from that standpoint. So we wanted to provide the opportunity to at least begin to expand the network. So it was agreed upon that a $50 million authorization under the CARES Act would be provided for broadband. And it kind of broke down into a couple of different areas. And what we saw after schools were suspended, telehealth, which, South Carolina has been recognized nationally for its telehealth work. It's very proud of what we've done in South Carolina. That has been the springboard for us to have the opportunity to taking care of the citizens of our state. And this time that people, the COVID-19, that people did not want to go to doctor's offices and other places from that standpoint. So the telehealth component of that has been critical to taking care of the needs of our citizens. I've heard wonderful success stories from throughout the state of South Carolina in that regard. So the $50 million is focused on the health, the telehealth, it's on the telecommute and education component. So we kind of broke down that $50 million into initially having $20 million dedicated to hotspots. Again, on a short-term basis. We understand that, and that's one of the things that probably frustrates us all, that the deployment and expansion of broadband across the communities of South Carolina, it's going to realistically take 3 to 5 years to get it where we'd like for it to be. We wish it would be shorter, but I think the reality is that's where we are, and we need to be fair and reasonable about the way that we set our expectations. But the hotspots were opportunity for us on a short-term basis to get service to especially school. We focused on school-age children. We focused on areas of poverty. We focused on our higher education opportunities. These little hotspots, you can hear that word, a hotspot, but this is actually a hotspot unit. And it is providing the opportunity for homes across South Carolina to have access. Even if their children have gone back to school, it gives them the opportunity of having access to doing their homework, or it has the opportunity from a telehealth component. So over $20 million in working with Office of Regulatory Staff has been deployed into the hotspots. We also provided a fund up to $30 million of the expansion of broadband into unserved areas. And that was critical. We think about rural and we say rural, but a lot of unserved areas could be just down the street. It may be that the lines go so far, but they need to go further. So we have put out through the Office of Regulatory Staff that has done a tremendous job. Nanette Edwards and Chris and her whole team have just worked tremendously. I would call a labor of love from their standpoint and their dedication in such a short time frame, whether it was the hotspots or the pool that we had for the expansion of the broadband. So what we've seen is over between $25 and $26 million of grants that are being provided to providers across the state. They're already in the business to expand their network into areas, to census blocks, census tracts that were not being served. That is a 50-50 match. So while, yes, we're putting $25 to $26 million in it, it's being matched for that same amount by those providers and those that are being successful. So really we're looking at over $50 million worth of deployment and work of expanding the infrastructure of the broadband in South Carolina as a result of those CARES monies. All of that work will be done by December 30th, 2020.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Allen, and I'm from the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff. First, I'd like to thank Palmetto Care Connections for inviting us to this event. I think all of you will find it worthwhile for the information that we have to present to you, but as well as the other presenters. I've been tasked today with talking about closing the South Carolina digital divide, and I'm going to focus primarily on the resources that the Office of Regulatory Staff has to provide to the consumers in South Carolina. So just in general, why are we here? Well, number one, I want to be able to talk to you about the Office of Regulatory Staff. Very few people in our state, unfortunately, have heard about what we do and the services that we provide to the citizens of South Carolina. So I'm going to take a brief moment to give you an overview. But of course, you're here to talk about broadband and internet. And I'm going to take a few minutes to give you the information of the task that ORS has been assigned in regards to Act 142. And anytime I make a presentation, I always see the biggest benefit is building relationships. So I'll give you my contact information at the end of the presentation. If there's any questions or issues that you might have, please don't ever hesitate to contact me. And then, of course, I want to find out what you need from our agency. So let's get started. Just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Tom Allen. I'm the Director of Safety, Transportation, Telecommunications, Emergency Response for the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff. On a day-to-day basis, you'll notice that nowhere in my daily activities does it include broadband or internet, but it does include telecommunications. On each day, we inspect railroads, pipelines, transportation vehicles. We also do the regulatory issues in telecommunications, and we provide emergency support to our utilities in South Carolina. I'll go into a little bit more detail about each of those in just a few minutes. A little bit about ORS. We're a fairly new state agency. We were, in 2004, the General Assembly believed that the Public Service Commission needed to bifurcate. The ORS became charged with being responsible for the non-adjudicative functions associated with utility regulation that formerly fell under the auspices of the Public Service Commission. Today, the Public Service Commission simply acts as judges in utility proceedings. And a couple of things that we do on a day-to-day basis. We represent consumers of investor-owned utilities in South Carolina before the PSC. The Public Service Commission sets the rates, but we advocate a position in front of the Public Service Commission. We also look at the impact of consumer and utilities' continued investment in reliable and high-quality services. We also participate in matters before the PSC for electric, natural gas, transportation, water, and wastewater, and some telecommunications providers. We're a party of record in all cases, including rate cases before the Public Service Commission. We also audit and inspect utilities, and we provide limited oversight of electric cooperatives. We also administer the leasing program for solar panels in South Carolina. Some of you have heard of us, and usually when you've heard of our agency, it's usually regarding rate cases. Some recent rate cases in the news, Blue Granite, Duke, Dominion, are both engaged in rate cases. You may have heard of the BLRA regarding the nuclear facilities in Jenkinsville. These are all things that our agency is involved in, but we do so much more. Take just a minute or two to talk about some of those other things. Our agency is divided into a rates group. That's what you usually hear in the news that deal with the electric and the natural gas, the water and the wastewater rates. But we also have a services group. They provide consultation to consumers when they have issues before with utilities. They also are very good at presenting cases in front of the Public Service Commission in regards to issues that affect consumers in South Carolina. We also have an energy office. That energy office works to set energy policy through the state. My group is the Safety, Transportation, and Telecommunications group. We have rail safety, pipeline safety, transportation, telecommunications, and emergency management. Like all state agencies, we have a legal department. We've got a communications groups that coordinates with outside entities, and we have an auditing and an administration group. My group, just some specifics about it. Pipeline and rail safety, we have inspectors that go out in the field and actively inspect pipelines, natural gas pipelines, also the rail lines throughout the state. And we've entered into agreements with the United States Department of Transportation to enforce the federal regulations. Our transportation group enforces the Public Service Commission regulations. Those are the state regs regarding for-hire passenger and household good transportation in South Carolina. That includes household good carriers, obviously, but it also includes taxis, limousines, charter, non-emergency transportation, and even Uber and Lyft. Our telecommunications group regulates those traditional landline carriers, but we also have some service programs, including Lifeline, which is to low-income telephone subscribers, as well as dual-party relay, which is programs, equipment programs for our deaf and hard of hearing folks in South Carolina. And then finally, one of the things that I'm most proud of is our emergency response. We work anytime there's an incident or a disaster or an emergency in South Carolina, we work with the South Carolina Emergency Management Division to get utilities resources during those emergencies and disasters. But you came to hear about internet. So I do want to take a few minutes to talk about our responsibilities under Act 142 and also talk about our progress in implementation of Act 142 that was passed in late June by the South Carolina State Legislature. Act 142, or at least ORS's responsibilities under Act 142, really fell into three buckets. Bucket number one was ORS was to procure mobile hotspots. Bucket number two included a state broadband map. And bucket three was the infrastructure program. Take just a few minutes to talk about each of those. In regards to the mobile hotspots and monthly service for educational purposes, there were some qualifications provided by the legislature that all students had to meet. Number one, they had the annual income of 250% or less of the poverty guidelines made someone eligible to participate in this program. An individual had to attend a public or a private K-12 school or a public or private college, university, or tech school. Also, the schools were responsible for distributing hotspots and ensuring that appropriate security measures are installed. And there were priority schools requested by the legislature, and those amounted to be about 14 different school districts throughout the state, as defined by the Department of Education as having a poverty rate greater than or equal to 86%. To this point, you see our numbers up on the screen. We have served 82 K through 12 public school districts with hotspots. We've served 4 private K to 12 institutions. We've serviced 2 charter schools and 25 higher education institutions for a total of 113 educational entities throughout the state have been provided hotspots and or monthly service. Our vendor breakdown includes 69,239 from Verizon have been provided. AT&T has provided roughly 23 to 24,000. T-Mobile has provided hotspots. There were some schools that requested only service, and then we've provided about 5,863 wired service. Now, these numbers that I'm sharing with you are as of Friday, September the 11th, 2020. We ran an update late yesterday afternoon, which was Monday, the 14th of September. And to date, we have provided 101,833 hotspots and wired service to students in South Carolina. I'm back up one slide. Just want to let you know a little bit about our process. We, of course, at the Office of Regulatory Staff, had no knowledge of how the education system worked throughout South Carolina. And we were given this mandate by the General Assembly in late June. So you can imagine we had to scurry to get 100,000 hotspots distributed to students by the beginning of school. We were successful in some aspects, but not very successful in others. But we're working through those issues. And overall, I'd like to say we've accomplished the task that's been given to us. Our process included coordinating with the Department of Education. And a couple of things that we had to do is we had to develop an order form from scratch to send out to the school districts. The school districts fill out those order forms of how many hotspots they might need, and then they submit it to us. We consolidate those order forms. We ship them off to our vendors, and then the vendors fill the orders and they drop ship them directly to the school entities. Now, we did require each of the schools to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Office of Regulatory Staff. And this MOU simply stated that the school districts agreed to enforce the provisions of Act 142, meaning that only students that were 250% or less of the poverty level were to receive those hotspots. I will share with you as well that we did have produced a great deal of communications materials. The link on my PowerPoint here, including our press releases, our program overviews, and our tutorials, can be found on our website, ors.sc.gov. Moving on to our mapping, Act 142 did mandate that the ORS find a vendor to produce a statewide broadband map. We sent out RFPs. CostQuest and Associates was awarded the bid. And in early September, we sent out surveys to all of our broadband and internet providers throughout the state. And these were surveys along with letters of support from the governor and the leadership of both the House and the Senate. And this requested data to be able to consolidate and produce a statewide broadband map. Now, this data is due back from each of the internet providers on September 25th, 2020. And during the month of October, CostQuest will take that data and provide the state of South Carolina a statewide broadband map, hopefully by the end of November. Moving on to our infrastructure deployment. The third bucket in Act 142 regarding ORS. We consulted with Revolution D, and they were able to map the identified unserved areas for infrastructure deployment. Once they were able to do this, our agency created an application that we distributed to all the broadband service providers throughout the state. They had to fill out these applications, and those applications were scored based on the need of the areas that they wanted to receive funding for. This was a matching grant, a 50-50 matching grant, and these were awarded right around the 1st of September. Each of the entities is required to enter into a funding agreement and to provide biweekly reports. They are to provide financial progress reports and also construction progress reports. They cannot receive reimbursement under the CARES Act until the project is completed and they've provided these reports. Now, there are some provisions that if they do not fully complete the project, that they could receive a portion of the funding. To date, there were 71 applications funded. This was from 13 different companies throughout the state that will have new projects in 23 different counties. And there were priority targets. 35 of the priority targets identified by Revolution D will be served, and the total award is $25,477,761. With that in mind, just a quick wrap up. You know, the pandemic has put us all in a brand new world, and needless to say, it has truly amplified the need for broadband and internet access, especially in the rural, unserved areas. ORS recognizes that the two great challenges in the state are, affordability and accessibility. And hopefully through this Act 142, we're taking those small little baby steps that we need, that our state needs to fulfill the promise to its citizens. We've seen millions of Americans at a disadvantage because they don't have appropriate access to internet. And that shutdown of the schools and the businesses has magnified that. And so hopefully, even though the focus has been on education and of school closings, but we know that to go forward as a state, the businesses in the rural areas and unserved areas need access to this internet service. So hopefully, within the future, the next couple of years, our state will take leaps and bounds towards providing internet access to all of its citizens throughout the state. So with that in mind, again, my name is Tom Allen. I'm with the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff. My contact information is on this final slide, as well as my boss, our Executive Director, Nanette Edwards. Either of us, if you have any questions, issues, problems, please don't hesitate to contact either one of us anytime. Thank you again to Palmetto Cares, and I appreciate all of your attention today. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Matt Hiatt. I'm the IT Director here at Palmetto Care Connections. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat box. So Tom has spoken to you about how ORS is closing the gaps for residential broadband in South Carolina. I'm going to talk with you about how PCC has closed the gaps for broadband as it pertains to healthcare in rural areas of South Carolina, but there is still work to be done. Who is Palmetto Care Connections and what is Palmetto State Providers Network? PCC is a 501c3 nonprofit telehealth network formed in 2010. We were formed to provide assistance in bringing telehealth services to rural South Carolina providers in an effort to increase the access to healthcare services. Lack of broadband proved to be the biggest challenge for telehealth due to the limits in connectivity available to the majority of rural healthcare providers in South Carolina. Palmetto State Providers Network was formed in 2009 to help offset the cost of getting broadband connectivity to rural providers in South Carolina. Started with roughly 70 circuits being installed and funded across the state. In 2015, Palmetto Care Connections became the consortium leader for the Palmetto State Providers Network. Today, PCC is getting funding for a little over 1,200 circuits. PCC Broadband Consortium funding year 2019, just in the numbers here, we have received funding for over 1,200 circuits with a total annual savings of $5,480,000. Total savings for the consortium since 2013 is a little over $17 million. The graph on the left here will show you how those savings are broken down across our state. So what is broadband? Broadband refers to high-speed data transmission. Examples of the most common types of broadband connections are cable modem, DSL, fiber optic, and satellite. The FCC broadband definition is 25 megs down and 3 megs up. In 2010, just as recent as 2010, that was 4 megs down and 1 meg up. The Healthcare Connect Fund. Telecommunications companies are required by the Telecommunications Act of 1996 to make annual contributions that make up the Universal Service Fund. Universal Services Administration Company, USAC, administers the disbursement of these universal service funds to eligible entities. Those are schools and libraries. The High Cost Program is one of the programs as well, Lifeline Program, and the Rural Healthcare Program, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. The Rural Healthcare Program provides eligible rural healthcare providers up to 65% on eligible expenses that are related to their broadband connectivity. Currently, FY 2020, which started July 1st of 2020, over $600 million a year is available to provide reduced rates to eligible healthcare providers. Goals of the Healthcare Connect Fund. They are to increase access to broadband for eligible healthcare providers, especially those in rural areas, foster development and deployment of broadband healthcare networks, and maximize cost effectiveness of the FCC's Universal Service Healthcare Program by creating consortia which should drive down costs. Some of the healthcare benefits for the consumers: access to rural healthcare providers, to medical specialists at larger healthcare providers through telemedicine, enhanced exchange of electronic health records, and coordination of patient care between providers and information exchanges. It creates a better continuum of care, remote training for medical personnel, and improved quality and lower cost of healthcare through access to services that would otherwise require travel. So who is eligible for the Healthcare Connect Fund? Post-secondary educational institutions, community health centers, so FQHCs, local health department and agencies, community mental health centers, not-for-profit hospitals, rural health clinics, including mobile clinics, dedicated emergency rooms for a for-profit hospital in a rural area, and skilled nursing facilities. Some of the eligible products to receive these funds are PRI and SIP trunks, your broadband and internet connections, network equipment, so switches, routers, firewalls, and the firewalls and that equipment can be on-premise or hosted and a monthly recurring charge. Whatever equipment is needed to make connectivity to the eligible circuit. Construction costs, dark fiber, network operations centers, and network design services. How the funding works. So your organization would need to submit an LOA with Palmetto Care Connections. PCC will submit that information for you via Form 460 to USAC. The healthcare provider will receive quotes from vendors if your current provider is not on evergreen contract with the consortium already. If needed, we will perform an RFP process, which has to post for 28 days. PCC, after all of that process is over with, PCC will go through what is called the Form 462, where we submit for funding to USAC on your behalf for the circuits that you have. After review from USAC, we will receive what's called a funding commitment letter that gives you the amount of money that USAC has committed to your organization for that specific circuit. PCC will invoice USAC on your behalf monthly or quarterly for your service provider to be made whole with a 65% contribution from USAC on your behalf. You, as the healthcare provider, are obligated for the other 35%. Some of the time frames for FY 2021, so the funding year 2020 has passed already, but the upcoming next window will be June. Our deadline will actually be April 30th of 2021. So as you'll see from the dates here and the time frames here, if you want to receive funding through this program, the time to get started is now. So the LOA and the 460 process can take up to 30 days or so. Now, from a customer perspective, it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes of your time to fill out those forms. The RFP process between the posting period and the review period takes roughly 45 days. Again, from the customer side, 30 minutes or so of your time. Invoice, contract, service order gathering, 15 days or so from us, takes maybe 30, 45 minutes of your time to gather those documents for us, and then we have to take time to go through those documents, find what is eligible in those, and get them on the network cost worksheet. which roughly can take and is encompassed in that 15 days of time. No time to the customer during the network cost worksheet form, and unless some questions come up, which is usually unlikely. Submission of the 462 for funding takes roughly, a day, half a day, no time to the customer, you as the customer. And then we, at that point, are in the wait period of USAC's review of your request. So a total of almost 80 days if you're a new customer and we're just starting the process with you. Now, again, all those times are estimates. Some of that depends on USAC and how fast they turn around the forms on their end. Available resources to South Carolina participants if you are part of the consortium. So there's video and network infrastructure as far as telehealth goes. Support services through PCC for your telehealth equipment. We can also come out and perform assessments and things like that for you for readiness of telehealth based off your broadband and your connectivity in your organization. There's a statewide global directory on that infrastructure on the telehealth infrastructure for you to be able to call endpoints across the state, as well as your endpoints can be in that as well. Some of the platforms that we have on the infrastructure are available to you in the state are Cisco Jabber clients and the hardware carts that you can use, so Polycom Cisco carts, the Polycom Real Presence client and the Polycom carts, like I mentioned, and then Vidyo, VIDYO, is another platform that is available for you throughout the state and on that infrastructure. So again, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it. Hopefully we were able to answer some of your questions, and please feel free to reach out in the future, either by giving us a call or shooting us an email or visiting our website to post or ask any questions you might have. Thank you again.